Okay, this is the Isosceles Triangle and Equilateral Triangle worksheet. So number one here, we had to fill in the missing angles, see all the angles we could figure out. Here we have equilateral triangle because all the sides are congruent. Right, we have a hash mark on each side. So triangle ABC there is an equilateral triangle, which means that the three angles are going to be 60, 60, and 60, right? If we do 180 divided by 3, right, all three angles have to be congruent. We're going to get 60. So every equilateral triangle is going to have three angles that are 60, 60, and 60. We also then have an isosceles triangle. We're given the vertex angle, it's 50 degrees. These would be our base angles because they're across from the two sides that are congruent. So we know that these two angles are going to be congruent. We know all three angles of a triangle add up to 180, so we can do 180 minus 50. It's 130. So these two angles have to add up to 130, and they're congruent, so we can divide by 2 and we get 65. So it's 65 and 65. From there, we still have to fill in the rest. Here we have vertical angles. We know all vertical angles are congruent, so this is 60 degrees. Here we have a linear pair. We know linear pairs are supplementary, so 180 minus 60 is going to give us 120. Okay, and then these are vertical, so we know this is 120. Here's a linear pair, so we can do 180 minus 65. That's going to give us 115. Okay. And then the last angle we have here is BCD here in the middle. So let's see. This is 60, this is 65. We know that these three angles added together form a straight line, so it's a straight angle. Angle ACE is a straight angle, that's 180 degrees. So we know these three smaller angles will add up to the big one. That was our angle addition postulate. The three small ones add up to the big one. So we have 180 minus 60 minus 65 is going to give us 55. So the measure of angle BCD is 55. From there, we can just fill in, right? So BCA is 60. DCE is 65. DEF is 115. BCD is 55. Measure of angle BAG is 120. And then the measure of angle GAH is 60 degrees. Number 2 is every equilateral triangle isosceles. That's going to be a yes. Okay. Depending on your definition, I guess. If you say an isosceles triangle is a triangle that has two and only two sides that are congruent, then it would be never. But assuming an isosceles triangle is just a triangle that has two sides congruent, then yes, every equilateral triangle has two sides that are congruent. So that's going to be a yes. Does every isosceles triangle equilateral? No, this one could have a different length here. So this is number 3. We want to find the measure of the unknown. So here we have two sides congruent. That's an isosceles triangle. So by the isosceles triangle theorem, if we know we have two sides that are the same, we know the opposite two angles are going to be congruent. So the base angles here are going to be angle A and angle C. Right? Two sides are congruent. The opposite angles are going to be congruent. So if this one's 50, this one is also 50. And then we know the three angles of a triangle add up to 180. So 180 minus 50 is going to be 80. So the missing angle, angle B, is going to be 80 degrees. Okay, over here we have two angles that are congruent. So the converse to the isosceles triangle theorem tells us if we have two angles that are congruent, the opposite two sides are going to be congruent. So the opposite two sides here are EF and DF. So since EF is 5 centimeters, DF is also going to be 5 centimeters. Okay, the opposite of two sides are congruent, the opposite two angles are congruent. If two angles are congruent, the opposite two sides are going to be congruent. Right, the isosceles triangle theorem, and then the converse to the isosceles triangle theorem. Number 5, we have three sides congruent, so we have an equilateral triangle. So we know the measures of an equilateral triangle, just like in number 1, are going to be 60, 60, and 60, right? Because 180 divided by 3 is 60. 60 plus 60 plus 60 is 180. Number 6, we have an isosceles triangle. So the two base angles are going to be congruent. So the two base angles are the ones opposite the congruent sides. So these are going to be your base angles. So x is going to be 46. Right. To find the third side of a triangle, if we have 2, it's just 180 minus the other 2. So 180 minus 46 minus 46 is going to be 88. So y is going to be 88. Okay, number 7, we have an isosceles triangle. Two sides are congruent. So we know the opposite two angles are congruent. So we know these two are the base angles, x and y here. And 40 is your vertex. So we know that these two are congruent. And we also know that the three angles of the triangle add up to 180. So we can do 180 minus 40 is 140. Right? So these two angles have to add up to 140. And they're congruent, so we can simply just divide by 2, and we get 70. So it's going to be 70 and 70. 70 plus 70 plus 40 is going to be 180. Okay, number 8 here, isosceles triangle again. The base angles, the two angles across from the two sides that are congruent, are going to be these two angles, y and 63. That means y is also going to be 63. Okay, and to find the third angle of the triangle, we know all three have to add up to 180. So 180 minus 63 minus 63, 14, right? 114. I'm sorry, 54. Not sure what I was thinking. 54. So x is 54, y is 63. Okay, I'll zoom in a little for number 9 and 10 and the rest of them. We'll go one at a time here. Unless we fit both in. I can fit both in. 9 and 10. Okay. So number 9, we can start off with a linear pair. We know linear pairs are supplementary, so we can do 180 minus 140. It's going to be 40. Okay. Then we have an isosceles triangle here. So the two angles opposite the congruent sides are your base angles. So this is also going to be 40. To find the third angle of a triangle, we do 180 minus 40 minus 40. That's going to give us 100. So x is going to be 100. And then we have vertical angles. We know vertical angles are congruent. So this is also going to be 100. All right. The base angles of this isosceles triangle would be these two. So we have the vertex angle, not the base angles. We know they're congruent, and we know the three angles have to add up to 180. So we can do 180 minus 100, which is 80. So these two angles have to add up to 80, and they're congruent. So we can divide by 2. So 40 and 40. And then we have a linear pair here. So 180 minus 40 is going to give us 140 degrees. So x is 100, y is 140. Okay, over here we have an isosceles triangle. The two base angles are going to be these two angles, right? They're across from the sides that are congruent. So if this is x, this one is also x. Right, so we can do 180 minus 75, which is 105. right? So these two have to add up to 105, and they're congruent, so we can divide by 2, and that's going to give us 52.5. Right? So this is 52.5, and this is 52.5. And then we have vertical. So this one's also 52.5. We have an isosceles triangle. Here are your congruent sides. The two opposite angles are the base angles. That's these two angles. So x up here is going to also be 52.5. Okay. And then 180 minus 52.5 minus 52.5 is going to be 75. It's going to turn out that these triangles are congruent. All right, number 11. All right, we have an equilateral triangle here. So we know the three angles of an equilateral triangle are 60, 60, and 60. We have a right angle here. We know the measure of a right angle is 90 degrees. So we can do 90 minus 60. It's going to give us 30. And we have an isosceles triangle here, right? These two sides are congruent, so your bases are going to be these ones. So x over here is going to be 30, right, and 30. And then to find your third angle, we have to do 180 minus 30 minus 30. So 180 minus 30 minus 30 is going to give us 120. So y is going to be 120 degrees. Well, I guess y is just going to be 120. Because if y was 120 degrees, then it would be 120 degrees. Right. And having a 2 degree symbol doesn't make any sense. Okay, so get this one. It's number 12. Okay, use the diagram to explain why triangle PQR is isosceles. In order to be isosceles, you need two pair of sides to be congruent. So we need to figure out if two sides are congruent. So let's use the information we have. We have 55. These are vertical. We know vertical angles are congruent. Okay. Then we can do 180 minus 70 minus 55, and that's going to give us 55. So now we have two angles that are congruent. So the converse to the isosceles triangle theorem told us if we have two pair of angles that are congruent, the opposite two sides are congruent. So we know PQ is going to be congruent to QR. Therefore, we have an isosceles triangle. We have two pair of sides that are congruent. Okay, the next one here, 13. Okay, isosceles triangle. So this is 55. It's the base angle. Okay, to find the third angle of the triangle, we can do 180 minus 55 minus 55. That's going to give us 70. Okay, then we have vertical angle. So this is also 70. The two base angles over here are these two. So we can do 180 minus 70, which is 110. And then we can divide by 2, which is 55 and 55. Here. Okay, base angles are congruent. So we can do 180 minus 120 is 60. So these two angles have to add up to 60. So, and they're congruent because the base angles, right, they're across from the two sides that are congruent. We can then divide by 2 and we get 30 and 30. Okay, up here for the top triangle, these are going to be your base angles. So if this one's 45, this one is also 45, which means we can then do 180 minus 45 to get 90. Right, 90 plus 45 plus 45 is 180. 30 plus 30 plus 120 is 180. Base angles are congruent. Okay, 15 and 16 here. So we have an isosceles triangle because these two are congruent. Okay, which means these two angles are congruent. R and Q are the base angles. They're across from your congruent sides. So if this is 2x, this is also 2x. So we have 2x plus 2x plus 40 is going to equal 180 because the three angles of a triangle add up to 180. So 4x plus 40 equals 180. We subtract 40. We get 4x equals 140. We divide by 4. Okay, and we get x equals 35. Right? Okay, next one, you have two base angles, two angles that are congruent, which means the opposite two sides are congruent. Right, that's your converse to the isosceles triangle theorem. Isosceles triangle theorem, if you have two sides that are congruent, the base angles are congruent. The two opposite angles are congruent. Converse to isosceles triangle theorem says if you have two angles that are congruent, the opposite two sides are congruent. So we know that 2x plus 6 is going to equal 3x minus 6. So if you subtract 2x from both sides, you get 6 equals x minus 6. You add 6, you get 12 equals x. Okay. And plug it in to make sure that's going to be 30. It's going to be 30. Last one here, we have three sides that are congruent, so we have an equilateral triangle. So all of them are going to be 6x, right, or 60, right? So you can do 6x plus 6x plus 6x equals 180. Then that's 18x equals 180. Divide by 18, you get x equals 10. The other way you could have done it is, since it's equilateral, you know each angle is 60. And then you divide by 6 and you get 10 equals x. Okay, either way would have been fine. 18 and 19. We have a linear pair. So 180 minus 125 is 55. Okay, we have an isosceles triangle. So this one's also going to be 55. These are the base angles, they're congruent. Right across from your sides that are congruent. We have a linear pair here, so 180 minus 55 is going to give us 125. Sorry, it's 55. Okay, and then the three angles of a triangle add up to 180. So 180 minus 55 minus 55 is going to give us 7. 19, we have an equilateral triangle. We know the three angles of an equilateral triangle are 60, 60, and 60. Okay. We have a right angle here, which was measured as 90. So 90 minus 60 is going to give us 30. So n is going to be 30. Then three angles of a triangle add up to 180. So 180 minus 90 minus 30 is going to give us 60. So m is 60 and n is 30. Okay, number 20. Okay, we have two sets of isosceles triangles here. So we know the big one here. Okay, so let's do that one first. Let's look at the big triangle first. Okay. So we know this is 50, and it's isosceles, so these angles are congruent. So if we do 180 minus 50, we get 130. Okay, we divide by 2, we get 65. So the big angles here are 65 and 65. Now we can look at the small triangle. Okay, this one right here. Okay, it's 90 degrees here, and it's isosceles. So we can do 180 minus 90 divided by 2. We get 45 and 45. Okay, so we know n is going to equal 45, right? We know the big one here, m plus n, was equal to 65, right? So 65 minus 45 is going to give us 20. So this one's going to be 20, and this one is 45. Right, the big one, m plus n, was 65. We got that from the blue triangle, the big one. Okay. Then we got 45 and 45 from the little triangle. So the big one's 65, the little one's 45. 65 minus 45 gives us 20. These two angles, 20 and 45, add up to 65. Okay, 21. We have two angles that are 60. So we can do 180 minus 60 minus 60. Which is going to give us it's going to give us 60. So we know this is 60. So since we have 60, 60, 60, we know we have an equilateral triangle. Okay. And if it's equilateral, the sides are all congruent. So 4x, 4x, and 4x. Okay. And the perimeter is 54. So all the sides added together, that's your perimeter. So 4x plus 4x plus 4x is going to equal 54. So that is 12x equals 54. Doesn't think that goes unevenly, right? That's going to be a half. So 4.5. So each side is going to be 18, 36, 54. Yeah, 4.5. Okay, the next one over says the perimeter of triangle QRS is 344. Okay. We have isosceles triangle, and so we have these sides congruent. So since this is y plus 31, this one is also y plus 31. So our three sides are y plus 31 plus y plus 31 plus y, right? We got three sides here. And the three sides adds together to 344. Combine like terms, so we have 3y plus 62. Subtract 62 from both sides. We have 3y equals 282. Divide by 3. So y is going to be 94, right? Yeah. So add 31. Um, 125. 125. It's going to be 250 plus 94 is 344, so we're good. Okay, so measure of angle Q, right? So S was going to be 68, right? Because here's our two congruent sides, so our base angles are congruent, right? So we can do 180 minus 68. Minus 68 is going to give us 44, right? Yep, 44. Okay, and then QR is going to be 94 plus 31, which is 125. Okay. 23 and 24. We got two more. Okay. These ones are easy. So our base angles are going to be congruent, right? So your two base angles are going to be the ones across from the congruent side. So this is also 2x plus 3. So we have 2x plus 3 plus 2x plus 3 plus 90 equals 180, right? Three angles of a triangle add up to 180. That's the triangle sum theorem. So we have 4x plus 96 equals 180. We can subtract 96 from both sides. So we have 4x equals 84. We divide by 4. X is going to be equal to 21. Okay. And then the last one, it's equilateral. So we know all the angles are 60. So you could say 4x equals 60. And then you could divide by 4. Right? And then x is going to be equal to 15. Or you could say 4x plus 4x plus 4x, right? It's equilateral, it's equiangular, so all the angles are the same. So you could do 4x plus 4x plus 4x equals 180. So that's 12x equals 180. So that's going to be x equals 15. Okay, so 4 times 15 is going to give us 60, right? So again, 60. And then this is a linear pair, so this is going to be 120, right? 180 minus 60 is 120. Okay, and I think that's it.